This is BBC World News America. Reporting from Washington, I'm Laura Trevelyan. Myanmar jails reporters who were documenting the killing of the Rohingya in Rakhine State. The backlash against this crackdown on the press is building. As a raging inferno destroys Brazil's National Museum, why was this building allowed to become a fire hazard? Plus, answering the call to serve once again. Why so many US military veterans are running for office in the midterm elections. Welcome to World News America. Myanmar's transition towards democracy has taken a step backwards. That's what the president of the Reuters news agency said today, after two of his reporters were jailed by a court in Myanmar. The government there claims the two men broke a law on state secrets, but their supporters say the journalists were investigating violence against the Rohingya. The BBC's Myanmar correspondent Nick Beake has more from Yangon.
In some countries, they would have been given a prize for their work. Not here, not in Aung San Suu Kyi's Myanmar. Instead, for journalists Wa Lone and Kyaw Soe Oo, who uncovered a massacre by the country's army, the reward is a prison cell. The reporters say they were framed because they were investigating the execution of 10 Rohingya Muslims. The UN believes in all, the Myanmar military and Buddhist mobs may have killed more than 10,000 Rohingyas in Rakhine State last year. But the reporters' investigation ended today with a 7-year jail sentence.
We performed according to media ethics. We didn't do anything harmful towards our nation. We didn't commit any crime.
The fury of the journalists' supporters was clear as the pair were driven to prison, now convicted of obtaining secret documents which could have helped enemies of the state.
This verdict is devastating for the two reporters, but also freedom of the press in Myanmar. Many people are concerned about the direction this country is taking.
The verdict and the judgment today has struck a hammer blow to the rule of law in Myanmar. Many diplomats have been at the trial throughout, and we believe that the judge has ignored the evidence of the case and has actually also ignored Myanmar laws. So extremely disappointed with that. We think it's a bad day for Myanmar, and we would call on the journalists to be released as soon as possible.
A crushing day too for the families of the jailed reporters, who've endured 8 months of court hearings. After the journalists' arrests, their employer, Reuters, published the full story of the Rohingya massacre the pair had been working on, prompting a rare admission of guilt from the Burmese army.
That crime wouldn't have been known had it not been for the reporting of Wa Lone and Kyaw Soe Oo. So what happened today was an injustice, and it's injustice that can't be allowed to stand.
But so far, silence from Aung San Suu Kyi's government. Last week accused by the UN of assisting genocide, this week condemned for an attack on a pillar of democracy. After free elections 3 years ago, there was great hope for Myanmar. It's fading fast. Nick Beake, BBC News, Yangon.
Ambassador Bill Richardson served on a panel set up by the Myanmar government to advise on the Rohingya crisis. But he quit that post earlier this year, saying the group was conducting a whitewash of what was really happening. He's called for the US and Myanmar's leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, to take steps to address the verdict.
I think the Trump administration needs to do more. They've sanctioned 5 Myanmar generals for their atrocities, but I think there has to be more pressure. Yes, international pressure got Aung San Suu Kyi out of prison and with her Nobel Prize. Maybe international pressure can get her to do the right thing, challenge the Myanmar military, but also pardon these journalists who were only doing their job.
Bill Richardson there on the jailing of those journalists from Reuters in Myanmar. Now, there are just 9 weeks to go until Election Day here in the US, and the results will decide whether the Republicans retain control of Congress. All 435 seats in the US House of Representatives are up for grabs, and 1/3 of those in the Senate. As Democrats look to win back the House, leading the charge are a new generation of military veterans who want to serve their country in a different way.
Oh, good. Nice to see you. Thank you.
Mikey Sherrill is running her campaign with military precision, trying to meet as many voters in this New Jersey suburb as possible. It's what you'd expect of a former Navy helicopter pilot, with her eye on winning what's been a Republican seat for decades.
I always laugh because I tell people, you know, I was a helicopter aircraft commander, and I never once started a mission saying, okay, I'm only taking Democrats on this mission, or I'm only taking Republicans on this mission.
Mikey Sherrill's campaign has raised record amounts of money, and in a sign the seat's winnable, the Republican incumbent chose to retire. This mother of four is running against the tax changes coming New Jersey's way, and she's for gun control.
I'm qualified in automatic weapons, and I know the danger of them. We do need the federal government to step in and make sure we have good gun safety legislation across the board.
Afghanistan veteran Max Rose has knocked on 15,000 doors in neighbouring New York as he tries to turn this Republican seat blue.
I'm actually the first post-9/11 combat vet to run for office in New York City history.
It's a message he hopes will resonate on Staten Island, where President Trump is popular. Injured in Afghanistan by a roadside bomb, Max Rose was decorated for bravery, and his run is inspired by his soldiers.
They didn't think about their own personal self-interest. They just tried to get the job done. And that's what I want to see more of in Washington, D.C.
That motivation resonates with Emily Cherniak, who helps Republicans and Democrats with a service background run for office.
When they served this country in their formidable years of 18 to 28, they learned to be about something bigger than themselves. If we had more leaders who were doing what's best for the country over what's best for themselves, I think it would fundamentally transform our democracy.
It's not surprising that Democrats are pinning their hopes on veterans to flip suburban seats like this one in New York and win back the House of Representatives. Americans have more confidence in the military than in any other U.S. government institution. And nearly 1/3 of the Democratic candidates running in competitive seats this November have served in the military. And Mikey Sherrill is one of 5 female veterans contesting the Democrats' top target seats.
We thought that if we were Navy helicopter pilots or federal prosecutors, we were moving forward and we were creating a better world for our children. And to see us lose ground, I think, was so upsetting to so many women.
The military retains the respect of Americans at a time of fierce partisanship. If Democrats' dreams of a blue wave materialize in November, veterans will be leading the charge. And for more on the Democrats' hopes in the midterms and what's shaping up to be a very busy political calendar, I'm joined by Jay Newton-Small, contributor for Time magazine. So, Jay, Democrats are clearly hoping that veterans will help them win back the House of Representatives. But couldn't the strong economy help Republicans stave off that blue wave?
Well, certainly that's what Republicans are pinning their hopes to. They're trying to they would love to make this election all about the economy, all about, unemployment and how there is no unemployment and all about the numbers. And unfortunately for them, it's really just all about one man, Donald Trump. And unfortunately, it's turned into a nationalized race where every race is him on the ticket, not the Republican on the ticket.
And a number of the key races that Democrats are hoping to win are in those very well-educated suburban areas that actually Hillary Clinton won them. So is that bad for Donald Trump?
Certainly you've seen indications in the sort of special elections that we've had in the last year and a half since Donald Trump's been president that those are the areas where he loses. Those are the areas where he's in the most amount of trouble because he always loses highly educated men and women, whether you're whatever sort of race or ethnicity or age. If you're educated, you're probably not voting for Donald Trump, and those have been the Democratic strongholds going into this election.
Now, the president has been tweeting today about 2 Republican lawmakers who've got a bit of a brush with the law themselves. He's clearly worried about losing seats. What's at stake for him personally in this election?
Well, it's a huge election for them because if they lose the House, as most most surveyors are predicting that it's likely that Democrats will win the House, they could move to impeach Donald Trump, and that would be really painful for him. At the very least, they will investigate enormously all manner of things, whether it's the Russia investigation, whether it's any of these payments to porn stars ahead of the election. They'll make his life incredibly miserable.
Meanwhile, all eyes in Washington turn tomorrow to the confirmation hearings for President Trump's pick for that vacancy on the Supreme Court. Is there any way at all that the nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, doesn't get confirmed?
Unless Brett Kavanaugh suddenly has a Donald Trump moment and decides to just blurt out his all of his secrets on national television, I don't think that I think he'll probably get confirmed. It looks like it's going to be pretty smooth sailing. These hearings are incredibly prepared for. He's gone through enormous amounts of training with people pretending to be senators on both sides of the aisle, and it's likely that he'll be very cautious in what he says. And if he sticks to the script, he'll probably get confirmed.
And this is a key nomination to the court, isn't it? Which maybe Republicans could boast about it in the midterm elections if they get him through.
Absolutely. This is a swing seat. So the court is 9 members, and that one seat sort of divides between the liberals and the conservatives on the court. It's always swung back and forth, and the idea that you're going to potentially get a conservative in that seat would essentially make the court leaning conservative for the next generation.
Jane Newton-Small, thank you so much for joining us with that analysis.
Thanks, Laura.
Now, officials in Brazil have blamed a lack of funding for a massive fire that destroyed the country's national museum. Most of the 20 million items inside are feared lost, including the oldest human remains ever found in the Americas. The fire broke out late on Sunday evening after the museum had closed. The cause of the blaze is unknown. From Rio de Janeiro, the BBC's Katie Watson reports.
A cherished institution up in flames and a nation's history destroyed. This museum was home to 20 million artefacts, but few are expected to have survived this intense blaze. With the fire now out, the extent of the devastation is becoming clear. Experts say the loss of Brazil's most important scientific institution is incalculable. A collection rich with extinct species from the Americas, dinosaur skeletons and this, a 12,000-year-old human skull called Luzia. Most of that could have been lost.
It's a patrimony of our country, but also patrimony of the world. Here we had some of the best specimens from South America. So we really will need your help.
Throughout the day, firefighters, investigators, even some people who worked at the museum have been going into the building, and every so often they come out with an artifact or anything they can salvage from the rubble. Among the onlookers was Livia, a museum intern. She's devastated. You'd never think of the Louvre in Paris catching fire, she says. This sort of thing happens in Brazil, though. 200 years of history just gone in a matter of hours. For some, the sadness turned to anger. They say spending cuts led to the museum's neglect. This isn't just Brazilian history that's gone up in flames. Many see this as a metaphor for the country's recent economic and political crises.
And we can cross live now to Katie, who's in Rio de Janeiro for us. Katie, can anything at all in that museum be salvaged?
Well, it's nearly 24 hours since the blaze started. The fire is out. Nevertheless, firefighters are still on the scene. Just a short while ago, they were still hosing water through a window. There are sparks flying every so often as well. It's still very early to tell what can be saved. There has been some good news. The largest meteorite ever discovered here in Brazil has been saved. But still, there are millions of artifacts that many believe have been lost forever.
And Katie, is it the case that the sprinkler system in this museum was not working properly?
Well, the regulations here in Brazil are patchy at best, and certainly here in this museum, that's something that a lot of people are talking about. There wasn't a sprinkler system, and that, in a very old building, which, is made of timber with archives that are made of paper, saw the fire spread very quickly. People here are very angry. They say that funding cuts in the last few years by governments, the governments have caused the museum to fall into neglect, and certainly that's what people want answers to. They want to find out how this could have happened, such a big fire, and why.
And Katie, you say that many are seeing this fire as a metaphor for the political crisis. Tell us more about that.
Well, when you think that, Brazil hosted the World Cup, it hosted the Olympic Games just 2 years ago, they were spending billions of dollars on these international events. This is a federal museum, there's federal funding, but that has dried up. Brazil has faced economic crisis in the last few years, and there have been austerity measures. And we saw, a couple of thousand people coming through the gates earlier today complaining about that, saying they wanted Mr. Temer to go.
Katie Watson there in Rio de Janeiro. Thank you. In other news now, Argentina's president has announced plans to try to contain a run on the country's currency, the peso. Mauricio Macri promised to cut the number of ministries in half, trying to show investors that Argentina is committed to reforming its economy. China has evacuated more than 125,000 people in the southern province of Guangdong due to heavy rains. The rains and flooding have affected more than 1.2 million residents. Officials say at least 2 people have been found dead. Thailand's top police training school has said it will stop accepting women from next year. The Royal Police Cadet Academy has only been accepting female applicants for a decade, and it's not clear why the policy has changed. Critics say the investigation of crimes against women, like rape and sexual assault, will be affected. You're watching BBC World News America. Still to come on tonight's programme. Why the Singapore government is paying for date night. It's all about encouraging love, marriage and babies. The World Nomad Games are taking place in Kyrgyzstan. It's a modern event devoted to ancient sports like archery and horse riding. Dozens of countries, mostly from Asia, are taking part. Here's Tim Allman.
The Olympic Games, it is not. But in its own way, the opening ceremony of the World Nomad Games was just as distinctive. Since horse riding plays such a central part in nomad sports, it's no surprise horses and their riders played a pretty big role in the opening ceremony. The athletes entered the arena, around 2,000 of them from some 80 different countries. The Games will continue until September the 9th, a chance for the whole world to marvel at the prowess and the skill of the nomad.
Tropical storm Gordon has been making its way through the Gulf of Mexico, bringing heavy rains and winds to South Florida. The streets of Miami were soaked as the National Hurricane Center warned that the storm will likely gain in strength before making landfall on Tuesday. Officials have issued hurricane warnings for parts of Mississippi and Alabama. Meanwhile, on mostly drier land, this summer was the hottest on record for England. As for the UK as a whole, temperatures tied those of summers past, as our science editor David Shookman reports.
It was a summer of extreme heat that for much of the country rolled on for month after month. From fires raging on the hills of Lancashire to the stark image of a dried out reservoir in the Lake District, to the punishing temperatures of city streets, filmed by a thermal camera, the pavements depicted in yellow a radiating heat. For anyone on holiday, it was perfect summer weather. Beaches were packed and seaside businesses have been booming. No need to fly to distant resorts for plenty of sunshine. But for many, the heat was tough to endure. This field in Hertfordshire was typical of many across Britain. The only trace of green was the cricket pitch. And for farmers, the long, hot, dry spell became a constant source of worry. We all knew the summer was hot, but what do the Met Office figures actually tell us? Well, the summer had an average temperature of 15.8 Celsius. And because that's within a fraction of what was seen back in 1976, 2003 and 2006, they're calling it a joint record. At the same time, England set a new summer record with an average temperature of 17.1 Celsius. The key thing was that so many nights were warm. And another record is that this year has seen 80 days where summer in the UK was above 25 Celsius. So does this mean every year will get hotter? Well, no. But as the climate warms, that is set to become more likely. The summer ended with a spectacular bang, a barrage of thunderstorms, and a lot of questions about how soon it'll be before the next hot summer sets yet another record. David Shookman, BBC News.
Now, a British company is taking a step closer towards robots carrying out surgery. It's unveiled a new machine featuring very human-like arms, which are controlled by surgeons using a console. In the future, these robots could do the work on their own. as our medical correspondent Fergus Walsh reports.
Imagine this operating on you. It's the latest in surgical robot technology, all controlled by human hand at a console with the aid of a 3D monitor. The aim is to make laparoscopic or keyhole surgery technically easier for surgeons, allowing greater precision and so giving better outcomes for patients.
It's considerably easier. All you can do with a conventional laparoscopy instrument is you can move it in and out and you can rotate it. And so what the robot enables you to do is to play with this in a much more wide range of movement.
The Versius robot has been designed and built in Cambridge. These robot arms have joints like a human's at the shoulder, elbow and wrist. They're smaller and more flexible than current robotic systems, which makes them more versatile. So they should be able to do many more types of keyhole surgery. None of this would have been possible without Da Vinci, the first surgical robot introduced to the UK in 2001. There are now more than 70 of them here, mostly doing prostate, bladder and gynecological surgery. The British Versius system is much smaller than this American rival and is aiming to do more.
So we want to do operations in the upper abdomen, such as gallbladder operations, operations on the stomach, certainly operations on the bowel for bowel cancer. We want to operate in the chest. So the aim is to replicate keyhole surgery, but with all the advantages of the small instruments, the wristed instruments, that will make it better and easier for the surgeon.
The field of robot surgery is about to get crowded, with several new systems being developed. The most eagerly awaited is Verb from tech giant Google. It aims to connect all its robots to the internet so they can learn from each other.
So when keyhole surgery came in, it really revolutionized surgery because it was able to allow surgeons to deliver really complex procedures in a much less invasive way.
This is where many surgeons learn how to do keyhole procedures at London's University College Hospital. Training to do this with the aid of a robot will be increasingly common, and eventually machines may be programmed to do some parts of an operation independently.
As we develop that human-robot interface, there are going to be certain parts of an operation, certain simple parts that may be able to be automated. If you think about stitching or closing a wound, these may be able to be done with a robot.
The cost of the Versius robot hasn't been revealed, but the company aims to make it cheaper for the NHS to run than its American rival. The first operation on a patient will be early next year. Fergus Walsh, BBC News, Cambridge.
From robots to romance. We've all heard of the government subsidising roads and education, but how about love? Well, Singapore's doing just that. It's a country with one of the lowest birth rates in the world, so officials are paying for people's dates, hoping this will lead to marriage and babies. It's just one of the measures aimed at ensuring a new generation, as Katie Silver reports.
Young Singaporeans enjoying a night out.
All the table tags, guys, when you rotate, do me a favour.
Speed dating is all the rage, but here it's being subsidised by the government as a way to get young people to meet.
The government really wants to get guys and girls to get together, to form families.
Coming here, I hope to expand my social network and coming to make friends, and hopefully I can meet someone that's suitable.
These dating nights are just one of a number of solutions, including tax breaks, baby bonuses and preferential housing that the government is using to combat the country's low birth rate.
Morning, Doctor.
Morning. Ivy and her husband Keen are in their 4th cycle of IVF, and half the costs were subsidised by the state.
I just get emotional. I just start crying for no reason. It's also financially difficult. If we don't have a subsidy, we won't even think of going to the IVF.
Despite years of intervention, there's little progress in getting the country's birth rate up. It's partly down to women marrying later, but the increasing cost of living here and cultural expectations that women will take care of ageing parents are also putting them off.
In just 18 years, Singapore will shrink from having 6 workers for each elderly person down to just 2. And the consequences of this for the country's future are dire. Fewer people of working age makes it harder for the economy to grow, and they'll face the increasing burden of having to pay for a growing number of elderly people.
One population expert says the reason government interventions aren't working is they don't get to the heart of the problem.
In Singapore, you have about 17 to 18% of young people never married. So that's one of highest probably in the world in terms of singleness rate. So you really need to think about why people are not getting married.
But time is running out. Policymakers are now targeting the other end of the age spectrum, getting older people to work longer. Katie Silver, BBC News, Singapore.
A novel approach there to increasing the birth rate. And remember, you can find more on all the day's news at our website. I'm Laura Trevelyan. Thanks so much for watching BBC World News America.